This video is sponsored by Delete Me. On February 3rd, 2023, a train just outside the city of East Palestine, Ohio crashed, derailed, and sent a bunch of toxic fumes out into the night. It was a huge environmental disaster, which is part of why I'm covering it. But the more important story is I noticed that I was hearing more about this on Twitter than any of the mainstream news outlets, and I figured out why that is. Plus, I wanted to break down the science behind it and what this all means, and why there's some startling and troubling reasons that you should know about. All that and more today on Tube Da Vinci. So let's start with, why isn't the news media covering this? If you go to CNN.com, MSNBC.com, Fox.com, ABC.com, you're not going to see this story, which is pretty massive, especially considering that some environmental groups are calling it a modern day Chernobyl, which is probably an exaggeration, but there's such a dichotomy. So why is that? So I did some quick digging, and I found that the company in question, Norfolk Southern Railway, is owned by the following companies. The largest shareholders are the Vanguard Group, BlackRock Fund, and SSGA, which is the State Street Global Advisors Group. And their ownership stakes are as follows. So this is the easiest research I've ever done, because when I pulled up the ownership stakes for the largest news companies, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, here's what that data looks like. And as you can see, there's a clear pattern. BlackRock, Vanguard Group, and SSGA show up in pretty much every single one of them. So let's start with all that we know so far and how we got here, starting with the who. The Norfolk Southern Railway is a Class 1 freight railroad in the US and was formed in 1982. They operate 19,420 route miles here in the US, mostly on the eastern seaboard and Washington, D.C. As we mentioned, on February 3rd, one of their trains derailed just outside of East Palestine, Ohio, a town with about 5,000 people in it. Hundreds from nearby cities and areas that were affected were evacuated because they did a forced depressurization, a forced explosion, if you will, where they released some of the vinyl chloride on purpose to prevent it from catching fire and blowing up catastrophically. It's the equivalent of emptying a big tank with a small spigot versus having the entire thing ignite all at once. And the plumes from this event spread across the sky in the region and left safety workers and other people with lung issues, red eyes, and all kinds of health reasons. And that's why there was the mandatory evacuation. So what's been done so far? Well, in a press release on February 13th, the company said that it donated $1 million to more than 700 families to cover expenses they incurred during their evacuation, and it was in the process of providing aid to other local businesses. It donated $220,000 to the town's fire department to replace breathing apparatuses used by firefighters, and $25,000 to the Ohio Red Cross to support shelter setup for the East Palestine High School, and around 100 air purifiers for residents. And if you're thinking $1 million, that sounds pretty impressive, we'll get into the scope of this. But that was like $1,000 per family. It wasn't very much. And there were some other tweets and things kind of to this point. The company also said that so far it has completed more than 340 in-home air tests with the EPA, which have shown no detection of any harmful substances. And there's going to be a report and plans for remediation. There's seepage into clean water sources and all kinds of other ground contamination concerns that are going to long outlive the news cycle on this story. Before we get back to that, let me tell you about our sponsor this week, Delete Me. Now, you guys know I love privacy online, and that's why I love this new service I just found out about called Delete Me. Delete Me is an amazing service, and what's really cool about them is even if you don't want to use their service, their online resources and blogs can help you take care of deleting your private information online yourself. But if you're like me and don't have time to keep track of it all and keep up to date on it, the Delete Me team can do it all for you. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Delete Me's privacy experts remove you from Google and 100+ data brokers all year long. Get a privacy report in 7 days, remove all your personal information like phone, address, etc. Delete Me will also monitor sites and repeat removal as needed, and users can even make custom removal requests. They believe in your right to own, manage, and remove your personal information. Since the ways companies collect, share, and sell your data is constantly changing, Delete Me solutions are also evolving as well. So stay a step ahead of your privacy online and save 20% on all plans with code Ricky when you check out. Links in the description. Huge thanks to Delete Me and you for supporting the show. So next up, and I think this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, especially when it comes to my analysis at the end, so stay tuned for that. But let's talk about the train. It was a 150 car train, 3 locomotives up front and 150 cars. And it was headed from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania. Michael Graham, a member of the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, said the train was carrying 141 load cars, 9 empty cars, and 3 locomotives which were used to pull the train. Graham said that there were 3 employees for Norfolk Southern working this route, an engineer, conductor, and a conductor in training. They were all interviewed and none of them were hurt in the event. And finally, security footage captured in Salem, Ohio, around 20 miles west of East Palestine before the derailment showed sparks or flames under at least one of the cars in the train. These train cars can be about 60 feet long, and in this particular case, there were 150 cars in total. That means this train was over 9,000 feet long, nearly 2 miles in length. Now, these trains were DOT, Department of Transportation, 111 tank cars. About 70% of the cars used in the US are of this type. They carry non-pressurized fluids, typically around 30,000 gallons, and can weigh about 198,000 pounds each. The NTSB said that 38 trains came off the tracks, with fire damaging an additional 12 cars. But of all of this, 20 of the cars were found to have harmful chemicals, explosives, and other potentially hazardous and risky cars. The NTSB is investigating this. The NTSB is the same organization that investigates all airline crashes. They're really good at what they do. They're very comprehensive and thorough, and a full investigation is going to take 18 to 24 months, but a preliminary report will be available in about 4 to 6 weeks, likely sometime in March 2023. In a quote from the NTSB, they said, "We have obtained 2 videos which show preliminary indications of mechanical issues on one of the rail car axles. This is known as a hotbox, which is a term used for when a wheel bearing overheats on a rail car. In this case, the overheating led to a fire which led to the derailment." Former State Representative Bob Hagan retired in 2021 after 50 years in the railroad industry. He says there are hotbox detectors that alert conductors to stop the train. "We have now technology that can interpret any time a wheel is hot through that, and it would go via the radio where the engineers would be running the train. The conductor, of course, would be sitting next to them." From the NTSB, Graham says that the train did drive through one of these detectors shortly before the derailment, and that the crew did receive a wayside detector alert shortly before the derailing, indicating a mechanical issue. Then an emergency brake application was initiated. However, the train was not able to stop in time. In a viewer video, you can see a wheel on fire as the train was moving just moments before it derailed. The takeaway here really is all the emergency procedures were followed. There were detectors to pick up on this sort of thing, although how frequently they were placed, how quickly the detection occurred, those are probably still going to be questions that are outstanding, but the right course of action was taken. The problem is 150 cars that can each weigh 198,000 pounds weighs a ton, and the resulting inertia means that the trains are going to be very hard to stop. It could take dozens of miles to come to a complete stop. And in this case, it just wasn't quickly enough. Hagan says that in his 50 years on the job, he's only gotten about 10 hot box alerts, which had to then result in a stopped train. He believes cutbacks on railroad jobs are partially to blame for this situation, like the ones that we saw here in East Palestine. When I was working on the railroad, you would have 100 cars, which would be about 1 mile. They've doubled those up, sometimes tripled those. So now you have trains that are 3 miles long that are impossible to look out the back window when you're going around a curve to see if anything is on fire. I think you're starting to sense where I'm going to go with this. Let's do a quick recap of the various chemicals that were confirmed by the NTSB to have been in the incident. The first is vinyl chloride, a highly flammable, colorless gas used when making plastics that are known to be carcinogenic. Here's the chemical equation for vinyl chloride. And by the way, this is largely used to produce PVC pipe, the white pipe you have in your backyard irrigation and other things. It's a wonderful thing. It's UV resistant, waterproof, weatherproof, and does a really good job of handling pipes. But the production of this chemical is pretty dangerous and highly flammable. There were also cars known to be containing butyl acrylate, a flammable clear liquid used in making paints that can cause irritation to the eye, skin, and respiratory system. There was also ethylexyl acrylate, ethylene glycol monobutyl, and isobutylene. 2 really big problems around this is the formation of hydrogen chloride and phosgene. Again, hydrogen chloride is HCl, which is the formation of hydrogen, which is found in water molecules and dew in the air, and the chloride chlorine from the vinyl chloride solution. And this is a dangerous compound that when mixed in a solution of water becomes hydrochloric acid. The bigger problem is phosgene, which has the following chemical composition. There's a carbon element bonded with a double bond to oxygen and 2 chlorines. This is a really big deal because this is actually used in World War I as a chemical weapon. And so while it's useful as a precursor for polyurethanes and polycarbonate plastics, it's really, really dangerous. And like I mentioned, World War I was responsible for over 85,000 deaths. So this is not something you want to be messing around with, especially because it's a heavy gas, which means it sinks down closer to the ground, which is one of the ways that it was hurting people in the trenches during World War I. Some say that this is potentially one of the worst land-based environmental disasters in recent U.S. history, easily making the top 20 list, putting it along the likes of other disasters like the Exxon Valdez. This, in a lot of ways, is kind of a startling reminder of the cost for this modern life of ours, right? We mentioned vinyl chloride is used for a lot of really useful applications that we rely on all the time. So are all the chemicals in our lives, but they are very, very dangerous and bad things have been known to happen. There have been numerous issues, like there was a plant that exploded in Akron, Ohio, the Bhopal, India gas leak, which left 16,000 dead and 500,000 people affected. And there were similar things in Beirut, Lebanon, in China, in Texas, when the fertilizer explosion caused some serious illnesses and death. This is one of those things that we don't think about all that often, the human element to this. But yeah, this I think is going to really shine a light on just how challenging and dangerous some of these chemicals are, and maybe that we should take greater care in transporting them. So a huge chemical leak of some very dangerous, very harmful things that were being transported via train, which was caused seemingly by a bad bearing in a wheel. Now, we don't know for sure, and that's why the NTSB is so thorough. These guys, I know it's tempting to just jump out and blame bad maintenance or something, but honestly, at this point, we don't know for sure. It could be other things. For example, in engineering, the way we find out about things like this is the first reported incident. Now, this could be a brand new bearing, right? These companies buy bearings from third-party suppliers and manufacturers. They might have done everything right, manufactured it, maintained it correctly, followed the procedures, and put a new bearing in, but maybe that bearing was a bad shipment, it was a bad lot with a bad serial number that the company has to follow up with. If this was a car and this happened, you take your car back in, they would figure this out, call the company, and then issue a recall and other cars that were affected from this lot. Maybe there was a new manufacturing plant. Maybe they changed their supplier for aluminum or some other metal. Who knows, right? But the point is, this could have been a problem with the supplier, or it could have been bad maintenance. Maybe they didn't take this apart, clean it all out, and re-grease the bearings. Maybe that was why this happened. At this point, we don't know. So I think we have to remember before we start casting blame, it's important to get all the data because the NTSB will do an entire metallurgical study. Even though this has been contaminated, they're going to be able to figure out as much as they can and give us the findings. So that's what we know so far. Now let's get into some of the analysis of why I'm covering this story. First of all, I thought it was really odd that the news wasn't covering it. Go to MSNBC.com or ABC.com. This isn't really listed anywhere. Fox has one story on it, but even then they're blaming Pete Buttigieg for some reason. It's not really about what's happening here. It's all very political, and it's a shame that this is what the news has come to. So I don't really watch a lot of news, but I wanted to cover this from the engineering perspective. One really startling thing I came across while researching this video was that in 2020, President Trump approved legislation to allow people to transport liquid natural gas via railroads through dense urban areas, right? And this is a problem because liquid natural gas is incredibly energy dense and very flammable. And 20 train cars of liquid natural gas would have the same explosive capacity as the bomb we dropped in Hiroshima. And that would be running potentially through your backyard. That, I think, really gets me at my core, and that's why I wanted to cover this video. Now, President Biden has tried to reverse this to prevent natural gas from being shipped this way over train, but nothing so far has happened. When I think about the story, the most heartbreaking part is the poor innocent people who've been suffering from this, who live in East Palestine and other neighboring regions. They didn't agree to have these horrible chemicals being shipped through their backyard. And this is horrible if it happened anywhere, but East Palestine has a small population of only 5,000 people. Just 50 miles away, if this had happened closer to Pittsburgh, we'd be talking about a population of 300,000 people and 1.7 million people in the larger urban area of Pittsburgh. And this would be a completely different story. Now, before I reveal what I think the biggest problem here is, let's talk about some other news that was happening just a few months ago. Back in November, we almost had a crippling railroad worker strike in November 2022 because they were demanding higher pay and sick days, paid sick days. Now, while they did receive a 14% pay increase to avoid striking, they didn't receive the 7 days of paid sick leave each year that they were asking for. Now, there's a lot of political views here, and you're free to have your own. Leave them in the comments below. We're happy to have some good, healthy discourse. But 7 days of paid sick time a year sounds very reasonable for critical employees, people who perform jobs that put other people's lives in danger. If a train derails because someone was sick and had a head cold and wasn't paying attention, what on earth are we talking about? 7 paid days of sick leave? Honestly, I think I would have gone with the paid sick leave over the 14% pay increase. For Union Pacific, another major rail operator, and we're going to talk about them because they just posted their earnings, so we have some more information about them. They were affected by higher wages, but it was very small compared to their real large cost difference in 2022, which was rising fuel prices, which increased prices by $1.4 billion up to $3.4 billion. But before you feel too bad for them, their net income, this is Union Pacific, not Norfolk Southern, but this is the data that we have, their net income rose to $7 billion, a 7% increase in 2022. They're doing just fine. Norfolk Southern Railroad, the company that operated the crashed train in Ohio, has their earnings call in the very near future. So you might want to look into that and see how they're doing as well. Now, all of this data and all these pieces of information come together for what I think is the really important piece of the puzzle here. These companies are cutting employees. For example, at the height of railway employees, the US had about 1 million railroad workers. We're now down to around 200,000, a fraction of that, and the lowest number it's been in for years. Why does that matter? Well, I think it really has to do with what went on here. We had a train with 3 locomotives pulling 150 cars, and of those 150, 20 were dangerous. They had harmful chemicals and explosives and flammable materials. That means that 130 were safe. What if we took those 3 locomotives, we broke them up, and we had 2 locomotives pull the 130 safe cars, and we had 1 locomotive pull the 20 dangerous ones? Is that crazy? Well, here's why that matters. If you were only pulling 20 cars, that's a lot shorter of a stopping distance. What if you had a lead car out in front beyond the stopping distance of that smaller train that could detect any obstacles or fouling of the tracks or any other things that might cause issue and report back to the main train to come to a stop? We need to take chemicals and the transportation of chemicals way more seriously. Why were those 20 cars mixed in with 130 others? You know how long that stopping distance would be? Well, a cynical answer is what I'm describing would require at least twice as much staff, right? You'd have to have the 2 locomotives with the engineer, conductor in training, and you'd have to have another set on the other train. And if you had a lead train for the other one, we're talking even higher. Odds are that the cost would go up. But these companies are making healthy profits, and I think these companies probably have to take greater measures to protect very harmful and dangerous payloads, especially when you consider that they're running through a lot of America or a lot of the world. Imagine if this happened where you live. If this happened in my backyard, a couple of miles from where I live, there is no depth to the anger that I'd be feeling right now. I have 2 young kids. There was a story that I was reading which was heartbreaking, that there was a mother and father that didn't want to come home because they had a 7-month-old baby and they were afraid of what they might be breathing in. We need to talk about this and figure out how we could do a better job. The news isn't reporting it very much. And I think this is one of those watershed moments when there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. I think a lot of the people that live in East Palestine are going to be filing lawsuits for this stuff, and for good reason. I think they should. There's going to be larger reform, and I think that's part of why the news media companies that are owned by the same companies that own the railways don't want us to know about this. The other thing too is these companies in the US, like the railroads, are notorious for just being pure profit machines, meaning they don't invest in research and development, right? If you want to cut cost and have greater profit, One of the easiest ways is to cut people. People are very expensive. They're one of the most expensive parts of any company. But the problem is you have to replace them with automation. You need better systems. You need more research and development. How much money do you think this company is spending on R&D? R&D goes to the engineers and scientists, the smartest and most valuable members of any organization. That money would allow you to have maybe automated systems that could detect temperatures and signal relays and do other things. But there's so little of that. In fact, looking at a train in the US is like looking at a postcard from like the 50s. They're ancient. They look like a relic from a bygone era. I spent time in Japan recently, and the trains in Japan are cutting edge. The Japanese are obsessed about trains. They love them like we all did as kids. I couldn't tell you why we don't spend more R&D to make trains safer. It's possible. We can make trains that are hybrid, diesel, electric powered with solar panels over the roof. Could you imagine a 2-mile long train with solar panels on it? Talk about lowering cost. Well, you could lower your fuel cost. As we mentioned, $3 billion in fuel is what these companies are spending in diesel. What if you had some innovation? What if you run electric and solar? Try to bring those costs down and pass that money along instead of cutting jobs and at the risk of potentially putting people in danger. This is the part of the story I think that we should all be talking about, and I'm sure you'll be firing off in the comments about. The reality is maintenance isn't sexy. Anybody can get excited about buying a new car. That's just cool and exciting, right? All the features. Do I want this package or that package? But once you own the car, 6 months later, a year later, how exciting is it to do an oil change or to get the tires swapped out or rotated or balanced? It's not. That's why maintenance always falls by the wayside. And in engineering, you just can't have that. Imagine if we took this laissez-faire approach with aircraft. Luckily, the aviation rules and legislation is among the most stringent on Earth. They have hardcore rules about how many flight hours before this part is changed out or inspected or greased or whatever the case might be. And I think we need the train industry to follow suit, and we need much better guidance on how to operate these trains safely. And if you think I'm overreacting and that this is just a one-off, like calm down, this isn't a big deal, you're wrong. This is the 12th incident that's happened in the US this year where trains have derailed. The 12th, we're in February, early February, 12 of them. The entire country of Japan had 13 in all of 2022. And we had like 1,000 and something. That's insane. We could do better than this, and I think we have to. But if the news isn't going to report on it, I thought I would jump in, at least kind of stake my claim from as an engineer in my perspective about what I think is going on and how we can do better. There are organizations that are looking into doing better, like the Coalition to Prevent Chemical Disasters. And there's other railroad associations. So see what you can do. Leave me your comments. If you guys have ideas or things I've missed or resources I can share in the show notes and stuff, write to us. Let us know. I would love to try to get to the bottom of this even more. And again, I hope that all the people that were affected by this are okay. There's tons of reasons for concern: contamination of drinking water, other airborne issues, acid rain. There's the lingering effect of this is going to last for quite a while. So thoughts and prayers are with all of you guys out there. If you know anybody who's affected by this, I hope that we can get some sort of remediation. We can figure this out, clean it up, and do better going forward. All right, that is a look at the Ohio train disaster and why the news isn't covering it, and why I think some of these companies are a bit to blame, at least when they make these decisions seemingly in the interest of profit. If you agree or disagree, write off in the comments below. All right, so if you like this video, check out this one next. I think you'll like as well. Until next time, I'm Riku Da Vinci. Thank you so much for watching.